I want to welcome you all to North Lincoln County Historical Museum. My name's Libby Durbin, and I'm the museum educator. And where's Diane? She's downstairs. The curator is downstairs looking for more chairs. We have a program every third Saturday, except for November and December when it conflicts with Thanksgiving and Christmas. So I just tell you what the next three programs will be, but you can watch the News Guard and the News Times for more detailed information. But we have an exhibit downstairs of bird carvings by Del Smith, who lives up on Cascade Head, and he will be talking about his work and reading some bird poems, and others of us will be reading bird poems on June 17th. On July 15th, we'll have a Chautauqua program. It's Tom Nash from Southern Oregon University, and he'll be giving us the background and stories behind some of the place names in Oregon, like Burnt Ranch and Three Sisters and Sweet Home and Galgi and so on. And on August 19th, we will have Ed Edmo, who is a Shoshone-Bannock tribe, and he will talk about what it was like at Celilo Falls. His family were Columbia River fishermen, and their traditional fishing grounds were covered up when the Dalles Dam was built. He's a renowned poet and playwright and storyteller. That's on August 19th. While you're all here, and I see a lot of new faces, let me say that we are always in need of volunteers to help the curator. And that's the curator back there walking around with the athletic
Hello.
She needs people to help her with the collection. We need volunteers for the front desk. We ask people to do 4 hours a week. And if I can get enough people that would be interested in learning how to accompany people, visitors, around to the exhibits and talk about the artifacts, we'll have a docent training class this summer. This program today, and with the exhibit that we have of Jim Watson's glass fishing floats downstairs, and we've had that for 6 weeks or so, has generated more response than I can remember. So I've always been fascinated by fishing floats. It's like always heard about buried treasure along the northwest coast, but this is a floating treasure that goes around and around offshore, and every once in a while it blows onto our beaches, and it's free. So I don't want to take any of your thunder, and I want you to all welcome Jim Watson, who will talk about his enormous collection of floats.
Well, thank you very much. It's really exciting to see so many people interested in fishing floats. I guess I'm not completely by myself. How many of you are beachcombers? Quite a few. All right. You're guys who make the collections happen. That's really terrific. I thought I would just maybe start with just a little bit of background about fishing floats. Some of this is real basic, and I'll try not to bore you, but basically, of course, man has been fishing for eons, and up until the advent of glass fishing floats, they were using wooden cork. And a man by the name of Christopher Fay in Norway in 1844 was the inventor of the glass fishing float, and it absolutely revolutionized fishing. It changed everything, because instead of the equipment being very, very heavy, it was relatively light. And so the amount of equipment that they could handle and the efficiency went way, way up. And fishing has never been the same, and beachcombing has never been the same. And the beachcombing got great. Where it got really interesting for us is around 1900, when the Japanese started making glass fishing floats. And the Japanese, probably finding out the ideas from Europe as they were filtering across, started making floats, and using it with their equipment. And wasn't too much longer after that, and they started showing up in the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, Canada, Hawaii, and of course Japan, and wherever else they can find to land. Let me think here a second how what I want to tell you next. There's just so many things. In Japan particularly, there are many, many different kinds of fishing floats, which really makes collecting very, very interesting and beach combing very interesting. They started out really experimenting with different styles and ideas of ways to use fishing floats. And there are cylindrical floats, there are round floats, there are sausage-shaped floats. Every year, I'm finding a new float, new old float that I didn't know existed. Last year, this year I've seen a float that I've never seen before, the year before I have. And what they were doing when they started was the little fishing villages would have a glass blower, and he would blow a float, and the fishermen would try it, and maybe they'd make a dozen of them, maybe they'd make 300 or 400. There's no way of knowing. There are no records. And then somebody get another idea and try something else. The same thing was happening in the next village, and the next village, and it's exciting to me to think, that you have no idea how many different styles of floats there are out there. And gradually over time, the methods of fishing kind of became standardized, and the styles of fishing floats, and they became mass produced. And in the late 50s, early 60s, some of the big glass companies, Asahi Glass, Hokyo Glass in Hokkaido, they're making 1 million floats a year. And so there was huge amounts of two sizes, maybe the 14-inch and the 8-inch or the 6, 7-inch floats that were used. A lot of those in the longline tuna fishing, and some of them in net fishing, were made literally by the millions every year. And the Japanese report that during the heyday, when they were still using hemp rope, that it wasn't uncommon for a fisherman to lose 25 to 60% of his gear every year. And there were a lot of fishermen. So there were millions and millions and millions and millions of floats set to drift out in the Pacific. And they say that there are islands out in Alaska that you can walk down the beach for a mile and never touch the sand. There are so many floats on the beach out of the outer islands. And I know it's true because I've seen pictures of it, and I've had many, many people tell me that. For some reason, the way the currents go, most of the floats that are found in Alaska are the baseball size, and they're common ones. Oregon and Washington and Hawaii have been wonderful, wonderful sites for finding the rare floats. And there have been a lot of really great floats show up along this area from the current that basically circles the Pacific, and when the winds are right, dump at times thousands and thousands of floats over a matter of a few days. And sometimes, it seems like we can go all winter and only find a few. And the improvement of the rope really, really changed things. And about the same time that the rope started getting way better with the advent of the nylon rope, they started making plastic floats. And I'm sure you folks that have, especially those of you who have done beach combing, see that you find a lot of plastic floats on the beach. And the Japanese liked the plastic floats for a long time, and they found though that over time the UV light would cause them to break down and they would fail. And going back to Japan now and watching what the fishermen are doing, and talking to the few that I can with virtually no Japanese language skill, they definitely prefer the glass floats. You can go to areas of Japan now and see during the off-season windrows of stacked floats that are maybe 15 or 20 feet wide, stacked in a row up to a triangle, and the rows will be 100 yards long, and there'll be row after row after row after row of floats. I've walked through a field where there were probably well over 100,000 floats. I didn't really try and calculate it. It was awesome. I mean, just numbing. And of course, what I do is I try to look through them all. Oh, there's a great one, but it's 4 in. It goes like that.
Yeah.
And it's hard enough to get one out, and it's impossible to get one of those guys to agree to let you do it. But, I mean, they're totally convinced that Americans are nuts. And we are, of course. In Japan, amongst other, some great things that they do, they dump a lot of their garbage out to sea. And everything that floats, well, not everything that floats, but a lot of what floats back onto the shore. And I've beachcombed in Japan where the garbage line, the drift line as we call it here, was maybe 15 feet wide and 3 or 4 or 5 feet high. With, oh, I mean, you can't imagine the stuff there is, old slippers and bottles and just, I mean, every piece of junk and debris you can imagine. Some of the bad things too, you see syringes and I mean, just, it's not something you want to just go casually tearing through. And, but interestingly enough, the beachcombing in Japan really isn't very good, although there's a lot of debris on the beaches, there aren't many floats. But when they were losing lots of floats, there were lots of floats on the beach. And it was on the beach with the garbage, and the Japanese call floats gomi, which is Japanese for garbage. And I mean, they literally, when you ask them if they have a fishing float, they'll point to their garbage can and say, you can take that too if you want it. And they just get a big kick out of laughing at us, going around looking for these floats. And probably the mass of collectible floats that have come out into circulation in the last 5 or 8 years, say, have been from people going to Japan and talking to the fishermen, going through their old sheds and finding the floats that they put away decades ago and are now, they just haven't bothered to take them to the dump. And I'm sure that, millions and millions of floats did go to the dump. At first, when the styles changed and they were no longer efficient, and so they just went to a different style, and then when they went to the plastic. And now they're just down to using a few sizes. On the net fishing, you see a lot of, say, 4 to 6 inch floats. And on the longline tuna, they use the 14 and 12 inch floats. And those are about the only floats I see in use in Japan now. And it's just, you can't count how many there are. There's so many over there.
What do you mean by long line? No.
Longline tuna fishing?
Yeah.
Good question. And I want to say, this is very casual. I'll tell you what I did to prepare this. I brought that float, I put together a few slides. And I figure, I can probably talk about floats as long as you guys want to sit here.
Your handout is up there too on your podium.
Yes, I have a handout up there. I brought that too. That's because I'm a collector to the point of being addicted to it. And you never know when another good float's going to come along. So I did include 2 handouts, actually. One is just a list of kind of the kinds of floats that I'm interested in. And just to know about floats, it's not bad to pick this up because it tells about the things that make a float collectible. And my phone number and my email and my website and my cell phone's probably on there. My mailing address, everything you think of. And the other one is just an article by a man named Curtis Ebsmeyer, who has a PhD, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but basically he studies ocean currents. And he's a very interesting guy. He spent a lot of time studying how the currents work, and if a ship wrecks, when's the debris going to hit and where, and he predicts these things and has people writing, tell them when they find things. And we've learned a lot about currents from Curtis. And he did some of this research. He actually went over to Norway and talked to this Christopher Fay's family to try and get the history of the initial glass float. And of course, that would be probably the float of all times, is that one of the very first production, but there don't seem to be any survivors. There are a lot of European floats from the late 1800s, but we don't seem to be able to find anything really that's documented around 1850 or before. And it started slow and it picked up. And of course, the European floats were used extensively in cod fishing, and there are a lot of European floats on the Atlantic side of Canada. I had some wonderful experiences in Newfoundland with collectors and fishermen looking for old European floats. But the main interesting floats on the Oregon and Washington coast are the Japanese and Chinese floats, and to some extent the Korean floats. When you find a float that is made with a triple mold, and so what you would have is a mold line that would come like maybe halfway down the float and then all the way around the bottom. So there would be one piece on the bottom and the top would come off in two pieces. That would be a disassemblable mold, and they would put the blob of glass inside of the blowpipe, and the glass is hot, and they blow it just like you blow a soap bubble, and they blow it up inside the mold, and it cools enough that they can break the blowpipe off, and then they pop it out of the mold, and that's where you get the three mold, and there are two molded ones, and then there are floats like this that are blown without a mold. And then when they break the blowpipe off, it leaves a hole, of course, so they plug that hole with another blob of glass, which has lots of different names. Pontal, button, in Hawaii they call it the pico, which is Hawaiian for belly button. And it has all different kinds of shapes. There's innies and outies, all those things. And I was talking to somebody here earlier. Sometimes when they're blowing the float, if the timing is just right, the glass is still very hot, but it's fully set, and the air inside is real hot. And then they mix up, and sometimes from a different set of glass completely. They'll have one pot of glass that they're blowing the floats in, another pot, and another team in the assembly, that is putting the pontal or the button on the float. And if they put it on just at the right time, and the gas inside the float's cooling quickly, and the button is real hot, especially if the glass right over the hole is real thin, the air can be contracted and it'll suck part of the button down into the float. And the more it sucks it into the float, the more collectible it is, because the more unusual it is. And collecting floats isn't rocket science. It's really very simple. The prettier the float, the more collectible it is, if it's a real fished float. Now, there are a lot of colored floats that aren't real fished floats. And as beachcombers and as collectors, we want the floats that have had the whole drama, from starting out as an industrial piece of glass that's a tool for fishing, and maybe it cost them a yen or less to maybe a penny back then to buy, and they tie a hemp rope on it, and they fish it a year, maybe two, maybe three, and the storm comes along and they lose it. Then it floats out in the ocean for a while, and we used to think, maybe 10 years to get over here. Then they said, oh, maybe 5 or 6, and Curtis Eversmeyer has documented from Japan to Washington in 2 years and 4 months. So that's how fast it can get here, and a documented case. And then, of course, somebody's walking along the beach and they find the thing. And of course they get all excited and they take it home. It becomes part of their family history. And maybe they keep it in their family for decades. And so there's a lot to this. There's from being a utilitarian tool to being a piece of art. And to me, it's absolutely it's fascinating. And there's just so many different colors, shapes, sizes, and a story to go with every one. This float is one of 5 or 6 known black floats, and it's Chinese, and you can take this out in the sun and hold it up every way you can. You can't see a thing. I mean, it's completely opaque. It's like onyx. And this particular one has got water in it, which is nice. It'd be nice if we could see it, although I'm glad we can on this one, because the fact that it's opaque makes it more collectible, or completely opaque. And there's also kind of a crunch in there, so there's some little glass that broke off when they made the button. And this particular float, I'm very proud to have, because it's the only black float that's been beachcombed in America. And that would be, including Canada, Alaska, anywhere. It's no black. Glass. They used something to make it black. Now I've got another one of these that if I hold it at a certain angle, it's very dark amber. So Either it was a mixture of some black and amber glass, or maybe after a certain thickness, it just, no more light gets transmitted through and it reflects black. But I can see a little very dark amber in that other float. And it doesn't have this another thing that makes this one kind of fun, and these little ribbons of glass on it. And a lot of times when they blow these, especially in the more crude conditions, there'll be little surface bubbles in the glass. You know, they're stirring the glass and air gets incorporated, and then they blow the bubbles. They blow the float, and as the float gets larger, the glass gets thinner, and one of these trapped bubbles can be real near the surface or even pop, leaving little holes other than the blowpipe hole. And the Japanese are real craftsmen near the end of the quality of floats they produced, especially from Hokkyo glass, which is the one that has the mark that looks kind of like a back-to-back F. Maybe some of you folks have seen that. It's like an F and then another F pointing the other direction right beside it. That's the mark for their floats, and they have very high-quality production of floats. And occasionally you'll see a Hokkyo float with a patch, but a lot of the times if they have a defect in them, they just recycle them again and start over because they have a lot of pride in their workmanship. The more crude floats were the Chinese. The Japanese, when they made the floats, especially near the end, it was very mass produced. They'd have a whole team of people working with the ovens heating the glass and blowing the glass. And the Japanese would use like a half of a mold, and they'd blow the glass into the mold, which would be out here, and the blowpipe is long because it's very, very hot. As it starts to cool, they would turn the blowpipe, and the float would spin in the mold. And so a lot of times you'll see these little swirls on the outside of these floats that don't have seams. And then it would cool, and they'd break the blowpipe off. And then they'd take them over and set them in a little stand and put the button on it. Then they pop it into a cooling oven, which would be a little cooler than the flowing point of glass, but still real hot. And they'd fill that oven up, and the ovens would be big. They'd fill those up, and then when it was full, they would gradually cool the float over a 24-hour period. And they had a very, very high quality float. In China, when they made the floats, they just had a blob of glass, they'd blow a float, sit it down on the ground, and a lot of times it's flat on the bottom, and kind of sink on the top. Maybe it's made with a mold, maybe it isn't. Put a button on it. If it broke when it cooled, they just started over again. If it didn't, they kept it. And so they were, and they're still making that way. I think they're probably still making floats in China. I have not done beachcombing in China. I haven't tried to research the coastal China areas. That's a whole other thing.
Is this the Chinese one?
Yes, it is. I think it's, yes, for several reasons I think it is. It has the characteristic roughness, the flatness. I'm virtually certain that's a Chinese float, but only by having seen lots and lots of floats and extrapolating the information.
What would be the market value of that?
Oh my gosh.
You guys have got boards of these up.
No, I really don't. I'm a very serious collector. I decided that my life's mission is to put together the best fishing float collection I possibly can, and document the histories, and eventually my entire collection is going to be in a museum. And my case down here is really the start of bringing that into fruition. And for a float like this, I would, without blinking, pay $1,000.
Where was this one found?
That was found near Grayland, Washington, on December 21st, 1997. So it was a recent find. A recent find.
Did you find any others at the same time?
I didn't find that float. I got that float from, I should not have to log over here to remember his name, Norm and Vicki Taylor, Norm Taylor started beachcombing when he was 7 years old with his father. He beachcombed and is still beachcombing today, and he found this when he was 54 years old, and he said, hands down, it's the best thing I ever found.
Why don't they recycle all those millions of floats in Japan that are on the beach?
Well, there aren't millions of floats on the beaches now. There were lots at the time, and I think they probably did pick them up and reuse them. And they're not making floats in Japan anymore. Or very, very rarely. Occasionally now, the glass companies are making what I would call display or decorator floats. And there are some contemporary jumbo rolling pins that are showing up that were made in Japan in the last few years. And brightly colored floats. I mean, one of the nice things about the contemporary floats is and I'll give Lincoln City a lot of credit, you know, with their Millennium Balls, you know. Nobody's going to confuse one of those with a real float, and I think that's very admirable. You know, they're their own thing, and they're very valid. But there are some floats that are in that category where you can't tell. I mean, there are floats you're sure it's a real float, there are floats you're sure there aren't, and then there's some in between you're not so sure. And that's sad because it kind of diminishes the integrity of it. But most of the floats that are very bright in color, that the glass is relatively thin and the quality is pretty high, those are decorator floats. The floats that are thicker and the color is duller and the quality they're not as perfect, are more likely to be real. And there are exceptions.
Were all the older floats a solid color? Were there any made that had colors in them?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, it was, you know, Japan was probably, you know, the first glass recycler, at least the first one I'm aware of. And they made their floats primarily out of beer bottles, sake bottles. And obviously they drank more sake than beer because there were a lot more of those kind of what I call Coke bottle green ones than anything else. And they also, you know, and then they had the beer bottle brown, and you mix them up and you get an amber. And it wasn't too long before the companies that were making other things also made floats, or maybe it happened the other way around. They started making floats, and then they started making other things. And then there were these wonderful days when everything went wrong with the plate production line. And those are the days I prayed for. And they had beautiful glass that was trashed. You know, they couldn't use it again. So what did they do with it? Threw it in the float glass container. And then you get great colors swirled in with the normal colors, or maybe near the end of the day it became homogeneous, you know, and you got a completely different color. And now it's hard to think of a color that a float doesn't exist in. But there are some that are common and some that are rare. You have some folks here that found the cobalt blue one, which is wonderful. And cobalt was, it's not quite a cobalt, but it's close to a cobalt. And the blue ones are rare, but there are much, much rarer colors than blue. But blue is a very good color. The brighter the blue, the better. And I have the great fortune coming across a beachcomb. It was beachcombed in Hawaii in 1971 at Kahina Point, which is the very western tip of Oahu, a 61-inch cobalt blue float. Whoa. And it is absolutely incredible. And the Hawaiian family was picnicking, and that's completely rocky out there. And they saw it out in the water, swam out and got it. And as they were lifting it out of the water, the net broke and it fell down into the water because they hadn't got to the rocks quite yet. And it arrived intact, and that was in '61, and I think I added that to my collection in '92 probably. I got a lot, but something like that.
What size float did they use on those big long drift nets that they use?
12 and 14 inchers predominantly. They also use the jumbo rolling pins sometimes. And sometimes they use the 61-incher as the anchor float, the first float out at the end of the long line. And sometimes because of ego or whatever, you know, the fishermen would say, make me up something really special for my lead float, you know. And we got some really great ones. There's a giant 61-inch circumference I'm talking about, which would be, it would have a diameter of about 20 inches. There's a purple one that actually has a hole through the button so that they could put an extra rope on it so he wouldn't lose. Didn't work, he lost it. Lots and lots of different styles. Why don't we, if we can shut the lights off, I'll show you some of the different shapes and colors. And there are many more. I mean, we can do a lecture every 6 months if you folks want to.
So color doesn't mean anything as far as country or boat or? It's
No,
just
not
a-
really. There are some cases where color was part of the fishing process. And I'll show you a couple of those, or at least one of those in my slides. Could you turn the projector on, somebody? It's a little slide at the very, all the way up. Okay. This is a jumbo rolling pin. It is, actually, that's not the one I want to show you first. There are 4 styles of jumbo rolling pins, and I've got pictures of 3 of them here. The 4th one is the one that's all the way on the right in the case downstairs, and it has a little bit more of a rounded end. And that is the most common of the jumbo rollers, and there are probably maybe 100 of those that are known amongst various collectors, at least that I've communicated with. And this float was used, at least in part, in longline tuna fishing. And the idea was that it would sit a little lower in the water and the wind wouldn't blow the line quite so much. And they were also, before they used glass, they actually had, sometimes they would use barrels. And they would use a barrel with a flag on it, and when it would catch a fish, the flag would come up. And the tradition of the barrel was a factor in this. And talking to the glass factory, I think it was at Asahi Glass, they told us, that the fishermen didn't want to let go of the barrel, so they made a barrel float. And the barrel float was used instead of the barrel with the flag, and then they kind of liked the way it sat in the water, and so they actually did some longline tuna fishing with it. I was talking to a man in Alaska, actually earlier this year, who knew of a fisherman who found a string of jumbo rollers still tied together. I think there were 7 or 8 of them, one after another. He found one, kept pulling the line, another, and he walked away with 6 or 7 jumbo rollers.
How big are they?
They're about 18 to 20 and a half inches, and about that big around. And that's a very good question, because it's very hard to tell from the picture. And thank you for asking that. It's a very, very good question. Now, there are other styles. This is what is called the old style. This was the first jumbo rolling pin that was made. And I think that's actually the camera, because we could adjust it, but then the others would be off. But it has a much flatter end. It's almost like the ends are free blown. And it's about the same size. It's in that 19 to 20 inch range. And then in the beachcombing in Japan, I don't know if anybody has beachcombed one of this style in the U.S., but it's just a different shape of the end. The spacing of the grooves is a little different. It's absolutely from a different mold. I'm not sure where it was made, but there is actually that's a 4th style. The very first one I showed you is kind of in between. The most common one has a little fatter end, and this kind of in between end, and then the oldest one. And then this thing showed up when people started going around looking in fishermen's sheds. And I have no idea what the population of that one is, but it's pretty small. Now this is a rolling pin floats typically are 4 to 6 inches long, and they're in a cucumber shape with little grooves on the ends. And this is a very rare rolling pin. It's about 6 inches long and maybe only an inch and a quarter across, inch and a half. And I have never seen another one shaped like that. And that was a float I found maybe 3 years ago. And one of those that's in that category of one, oh, I've never seen one of those before, this is fantastic. And I'm sure there are lots of other floats that I've yet to see, and it's exciting to think about it. This is kind of like a missing link. You know, you see, these are all unusual shaped rolling pins, but it shows you the variety, 3 different shapes. This one's got a little bit of purple in it. This is called sun purple. And prior to World War I, they used manganese in the glass to make it clear. And over time, would oxidize. With the outbreak of World War I, most of the manganese was coming from Germany, and that stopped the flow of manganese. And so they started making glass without, the floats without manganese. So if you see one that's starting to turn lavender, it's probably very early this century, before World War I. Or from glass at least, that got the manganese before World War I. This one also is starting to turn lavender, and this is kind of in between the rolling pins with the grooves and something round. And for years, you know, you sit and think, what shape could they have made that I haven't found yet? And I thought of that shape, and that float's about that big. And when I saw that float, I got so excited I got a heart attack. And that float was found on Kauai by a judge in the late 70s. And that's in my collection, and I'm very, very, very happy to see it. Very happy to see it.
What color is that one up on the left?
The one up on the left is a Japanese float with a amber swirl in it. And it's got a mark on that. That's another very reflective float. This is another one of those weird floats. I'm showing you all the strangeness first, I guess. This is, I call it a cigar. It's probably 7 inches long, and only maybe an inch and a half across, and no grooves. It's obviously been rolled. It's got ripples all the way across it. And I've never seen another one like that, and I've never seen another one like that big sausage either. They must have made more than one, but how many decades ago, and are they in the dump, are they, sitting in somebody's basement with beachcombed, you don't know. But there are a lot of interesting ones out there. This is this probably I should have shown you before I showed you the oval one. This is about, well, it's exactly 9.5 inches long. And this one also happens to be turning violet. And these rolling pins were used along the top of nets for smaller fishing, herring fishing, and for small fish, the small rolling pins. That's what they were used for. And the one beside it is clear with kind of a swirled smoke glass through it. And it looks like it's maybe sandblasted here. But actually there was a clear glass swirled in the melting pot of glass with some kind of smoky glass. And that was a real fun. This is called a football. It's about probably 8 inches long. And that's one of the many styles of floats, and they're fairly rare. I've got 3 of them in my collection. They're very, very nice float. This is a cylinder float. Somebody was asking, did they ever use different colors? Here's a corner of the float that is cobalt green with a cobalt button. And this float is about that tall. And it really looks like it was almost made in a bottle mold, but there aren't any mold lines on it. And the bottom is quite curved on this one, and it has the serrated button. There's another one. I hope I haven't missed. This one has a flatter bottom, and there aren't any serrations in the button on that one. And there are at least two, and there's kind of one in between, so I'd really say there are three styles of cylinder floats. This color didn't show up real well, but this is kind of a peach-colored float, and on the button there is a diamond shape, and inside it a TO. And the TO floats, there are five known colors. There's the common green, there's purple, peach, common green, purple, peach, brown, and kind of a lavender. But the purple is very dark. It's like a red wine purple. It's a very dark in color. And that's the peach one. This is just another strange shape. I had never seen one shape quite like this. I got this from a fisherman in Hawaii. And that's about probably 7 inches tall. Has water in it. Maybe you can see that, maybe that's just a reflection of the glass. But there's a little bit of water in that float. This is another one of those floats. I've never seen another one like it. It's about that long, that big around, and the glass is very, very thin. And I believe this would be clearly in that category of kind of an experimental float, and I don't think many were made, and the survival rate on that float would have to be very poor because it couldn't take much of a knock. And I've actually had some of these round floats that are heavy glass that I've accidentally dropped, and they bounced, and they don't break. And of course, other times you touch one, and it breaks. It's the luck of the draw. This is a very fragile float, and it's the only one of this style that I've ever seen. And if I give any of you folks information you know differently about, please tell me, because I'm always trying to learn more about floats. And if there's another one out there that somebody's found, they know, and I don't, and I should like to. But that's a very unusual shape float.
Do you remember where you found all your floats?
Sure I do.
Why don't you tell us as we go through where you found them?
I found this float on a fence on Kauai. Yeah, I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you the story, but I will, because I think it kind of indicative of how I feel about floats. I was over here in my home, and I got a call from a friend of mine on Kauai who said they found a binary float, which I will show you a picture of in a few minutes when they're coming up. And I said, well, gee, that's really nice. Why don't you send me a picture of it? And she mailed me a picture, and it was hanging on a fence, and this was hanging beside it. And I literally called the travel agent, bought a ticket, and flew to Kauai. And within 3 or 4 days, I was on Kauai and was able to get that float. And I would do it again in a second. Now, you're looking at my favorite float. This is called a dumbbell because it's kind of like a weight. It's narrow in the center, and you can imagine, you know, the pipe between two weights and you're doing your curls. And there are 5 or 6 of these that are known to exist. And it's just, it's there's so many things interesting about this float. It's a very complex shape, which I love. It's made with a mold on the bottom. It's free blown on the top, and the collar is pushed in by hand. You can actually see the thumbprints and glove marks from wearing asbestos gloves. And that particular float was found in Oregon, and I believe I got that from Jim Hoffenstein's collection. It came from down by Bandon. That was found by Bandon. And the next one was found that was found at Cape Kiwanda. And here you can actually see the seam, right there. And what happened is, they plugged it up while it was very hot, and it, either from contracting air, it sucked in, or it just collapsed before they put the button on it. But it collapsed. And I call it Mrs. Butter's because it kind of looks like that. And it's dark brown. And yeah, that is thrilled to have that float. Yeah, that's a very, very fun float. This is a sausage float, and most of the sausage floats are about 4 inches long and shaped like a sausage. But this is kind of like that other one I showed you, the big one, except this one's about 6 inches long, 6.5 inches actually. And those were in a net tied to the top of a fishing net. So they had a net around them that attached to the top of a large fish net. Of course, there'd be weights on the bottom and floats on the top to keep the net upright and the fish would swim into it. You know, guys, fish before. There's others, there's no really much. This is the only float I've ever seen like this. I mean, you sit and think, you know, gee, you know, they put a groove, 2 grooves in most rolling pins. You know, you've seen a couple there with 1 in it. And why, wonder if they ever put a groove in a round one? Well, here it is. And it's almost like one of the jumbo rolling pins without the center in it. I mean, this is kind of that same shape. And that's a little smaller than a ball mill. And very unusual shape. It's obviously made that way on purpose. I particularly like unusual shapes that aren't just happenstance shapes that, you know, because the glass was hot and poor craftsmanship. I like weird shapes that were made that way on purpose. And this was obviously made to be this way. And there are probably others, but I've never seen them. This is a binary. This is the float I expected to see in the picture. And in fact, there was one in the picture, but I wasn't looking at it. This one, it was pretty hot when it was made, and it collapsed on this side. And this one has no seams. This was free blown and stuck together. And the later binary floats have seams. And well, that's another picture of the same float.
What did it join at the tunnel while they were hot?
Yeah. This float was found on a Pacific island during World War II by a military guy who brought it back, and I got it out of an antique store and floated it. This is one with a seam, and the seamed ones are quite a bit more common. But what's very uncommon about this one is it's got a great big spindle in it. And this is called a light bulb or a pear float. And in Amos Wood's book, he said that they believe those were made for the tourist trade, but I have on absolute authority that these have been beachcombed, and I'm certain it's a real fishing float. There are some areas where Amos Wood is wrong in his book, but this is an exceptionally good book. It is available here at the museum, and if anyone doesn't have a copy of this, if you're interested in floats at all, this is the Bible. This is the start. There are probably 3 times as many marks as he has recorded in this book. It's time to do another book, but Amos did a wonderful job. He should be highly acknowledged for it. He passed away years ago, but he was he did more for promoting the knowledge of beachcombing than anyone else. He did a great job. And this float is probably about 14 inches long. It's very, very slightly lavender if you look at it, and it's a pretty rare float. The next float is a variation of the same float, but it's got a big bubble at the end of it. quite an unusual float.
Both of those look pretty clear.
Pretty clear? Yeah, that was quite clear.
So
That was
they're
quite
very
clear.
old.
Just, you know, well,
Do you think they're before World War I?
that would be, I would say, no, that would be after World War I. I would say that was probably in the 20s. Well, it is turning a little bit lavender, so it could be right before the war. You're absolutely right, when you think about it. Now this, you're asking, do they ever have colors for specific reasons? This is a very interesting float. There weren't many of these made. We found the little glass company that actually made these. These were made in the late 60s, and they started with clear glass and broken colored glass, and they rolled the glass to get this leopard skin look and blew the float. And it's a commonly used glass blowing technique today. And this was part of a squid lure. And the float actually was to attract the squid to reach up and grab for it. And there were hooks around it in a little jig, similar to the squid jig that's down in the case. And they get wrapped around it and they pull them out of the reef. And so that was actually used for, as part of a lure for squid fishing. And there was a weight, of course, to hold the thing down because the float would make it want to float, and they wanted it down on the bottom. And that's a little smaller than a baseball. And on the side of it, you can see one of those 9.5-inch rolling pins next to it. Now, does color ever get mixed in? Boy, I guess.
Oh,
And this is one of the most dramatic examples that I've seen. This is a dark burgundy mixed into a copal green. And that's about a 5-inch float. And that was another one that was very exciting to find. There's another picture of that peach TO. Can you see the diamond just barely? There just wasn't enough light coming through, and there's a TO. Anyway, that's, oh, I gotta tell you the story how I found this book. It was unbelievable. I was driving along on the coast of Japan, and I saw some floats in the ditch. And I got out, and I looked through the floats in the ditch, and they were all common, you know, and I'm like, oh, that's too bad. I mean, I didn't even pick them up. There's so many floats over there, you can't think about picking up a float if it isn't a collectible float, because you know, your car's filled up, and how are you gonna take it home? You know, so I walked by a million floats. And, but about, like from here to the float over there was a sack. So I go over to the sack, and it was full of garbage. Now, what made me do it, I have no idea. But I emptied it out, and that float was in the bottom of the garbage sack. You know, I don't know, but I mean, that was my whole trip. I just, you know, I mean, you see why they laugh. I mean, I was literally going through the garbage. And I mean, why was that float, which was probably from the late 20s or early 30s, in a sack of garbage? A paper bag of garbage. I mean,
Collector had it for a while, and decided to quit collecting for good.
you were meant to have it.
yeah. To me, the TO is the Rolls Royce of stamps, because they have tremendous character. They're very pretty to look at. The colors are incredible.
What was the name of the factory?
You know, I don't know who made it. I've not been able to locate the factory where it was, but the other, there's an old glass blower at Hookyo Glass. He's about, he's in his early 80s now. And I've showed him pictures of a lot of floats. And so he was just, that was made. You know, you wish I understand everything he said, but I got enough. I got a lot more than I knew before I talked to him. This is what I would call is about as close to a real yellow as a real float gets. It's a Vaseline yellow. It's a little bit of a green yellow, but that's a really yellow float. I've never seen a yellow in a real float for that. And that's about 4.5 inches probably.
Do you make the nets around it?
Yes, I do. I use braided fish line. I've used different weights. I'm pretty much now only use 130-pound test. And I weave those or tie those. It doesn't take, I can do a float in 3 or 4 minutes. And never had one break. And you know, it's held up by multiple strands, and the float maybe weighs a pound, and each strand's 130-pound test, so I think they're pretty safe. And I love displaying the floats this way because it really lets the light through them without blocking the view. And you'll notice that almost all of my floats don't have nets on them. Some people love nets. I collect floats. And I want to see the floats. And there are floats that I keep the nets on, but only if there's some particular reason. I had a friend who was actually sells a lot of European floats, and he sold a float the other day, and somebody wanted to return it, and they said that wasn't the original net. Well, the Japanese are changing the nets on these floats every couple of years. You know, I don't know if you can ever get a float with an original net, unless they just lose it immediately. But I like the floats where you can really see them. I think this way of displaying has worked very well for me. And I hang them on hooks in the window and use the fish line. And it's worked really well. And never lost a float doing that. Never had one break. I try and hang them in such a way that if they swing a little bit, they won't hang into each other. This is another kind of an unusual shape. It's a little more rounded at the ends, and it's got a big swirl of green through it. It's hard to show up in that picture, but it's kind of like a forest green through a light green. And on the side, you can see a little bit of a European float. It's an LT. It's a English float from World War II time. Okay, now this is another one of those squid jig floats, and this one is yellow. And so there's a red one and a yellow one. And I understand there may be an orange one too, but I haven't seen it. Here's another float with a swirl of that same amber, but that other one had such a big swirl. And this was found on Kailua Beach in, oh gosh, I think it was 47 or something like that. I got it in my notes, but on Oahu. And here's a real nice little tiny view of serrated button on one of the cylinder floats. And this is a little bit of one of the few red real fished floats. I had a wonderful phone call one time. I was writing an ad on a log for fishing floats, and an old Japanese man called me, and he told me this story about when he was a kid. He used to go down to Aloha Tower where the boats would dock, and near there were other docks where fishing boats would be, and he and his buddies would go over to the fishing boats, and he could speak Japanese because that's what was spoken at his home. And he went up and talked to the fishermen while his friends went to the back of the boat and stole floats. And then they would sell them to tourists. And the guys like me, I guess. And he said that the guy, just to make conversation, he said, well, what's the red float for? And the guy told him the story that every 100 meters or whatever distance, they would tie a red float on the line, and it would help them keep track of how much longline tuna line was out. And some of those longline tuna lines are miles long. I mean, it's staggering how much fishing gear they fish with now. I'm thinking, and I don't know, but I would speculate that when a lot of the good floats were lost in the teens and 20s and 30s, that they didn't use as long of lines as they do now, because now they've got the huge winches and everything. But long lines. And those red floats, like on just in the very top of were marker lines. One of my favorites, the real purple. You guys have probably heard about the Emperor's Fleet. Any of you guys heard about the Emperor's Fleet? Nobody in Japan's heard about it. One of those stories that goes. When I asked about the Emperor's Fleet in Japan, they thought I was nuts. But they already thought I was nuts. Anyway, this is a good sized float. It's about 14 inches around, and it's a little bit pumpkin shaped. And a lot of times these real, not decorated, but the real floats will have this ring around them, and then the button will be kind of stippled, which is like orange skin. It'll have little bumps on it. And it's just the texture, the temperature of the glass, the way they made them. But that's a distinct style of float and highly collectible. There's another one that actually a little bit different color, but it's just a little too dark. But it's got that same ring and button inside it. And it kind of comes up like a board a little bit. I tried to capture that. We got the color pretty well, but really hard to see that. That's
Are they
hanging up on a
rare?
skylight in my ceiling, and I was free-handing holding the camera about 6 feet away, and I guess I'm lucky I did as well as I did.
Are they more rare?
Oh yeah, these are quite rare. These are quite rare.
Did you
One
find
of,
that
one
or
of
what?
many thousands.
Did you find that?
Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked me that. I have found few collectible floats, counting the one I found in the ditch and a couple of others. If I got them out of somebody's shed, if I'm a collector, I don't really consider that I found it in the beach-combing sense. But if I found it in the ditch and garbage, I'd call that one. I think I can take that one. But typically, a collectible float is 1 in 500 or 1 in 1,000. And I've been fortunate enough to go through probably half a dozen collections of close to 1,000 floats. In some cases, over 1,000 floats. And from my own experience, looking through a collection that's never been looked through by another collector, I'd say that you get a collectible float 1 out of every 500 or 1,000. And which basically means if I wanted to beachcomb my collection, it would take me 50 lifetimes. And plus, I'm not here at the right time. I mean, you have to be doing this stuff in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and to some degree the 60s. 60s, there was some very good beachcombing in the 60s. There's a 40-year span there, maybe, where the beachcombing was great. And I started in '72, so I missed the boat.
If you wanted to buy one like that, approximately what would it cost?
I spent 1,000 into it.
I'm insured.
Yes, I am.
Do they insure you for earthquake?
Yep, my collection's completely insured, and it was much easier than I thought it would be. Because, there aren't that many collectors, and there aren't any that I know that pay the kind of prices that I do. But I was able to add that to my homeowner's policy with no hassle at all. They didn't even come out and inspect it. Okay, this is a fun float, and if anybody knows what this is, I sure wish they'd tell me. I heard about some real dark brown and amber floats in London, and I bought 25 of them. And going through those floats, and they were all really nice, big, 16, 17-inch floats, heavy glass, a little bit irregular, lots of bubbles. I mean, they're really nice floats, and I believe they're Japanese, or I believed they were Japanese. And then, all of a sudden, out of that 24, I, once again, about had a heart attack. I found this one with these 2 stripes of glass on it. Let me show you here in these next pictures. And here you can see how I've got these hung. I've got these hung up in underneath the skylight. That's what I was talking about. And I'm standing in there trying to take a picture of it. This is actually a strip of glass with a pass-through for a rope. And there's one on each side to connect it.
I've seen those before.
You have.
I've seen them on the East Coast Cape Cod shore.
Is that right?
This was years ago when I was a kid, and they used to put a six-mast in the Portuguese schooners that would go up to the Grand Banks.
Wow,
And I think that's what someone was handling.
fantastic, thank you. I had heard there's one possibility that they used glass floats with anti-submarine nets with explosives in them at the harbors in England and in Europe during World War II. And it's possibly could have been that, but I think somebody was just speculating. I really appreciate that. So it's like Portuguese fishing.
It's a Portuguese schooner.
Portuguese
It's
schooner.
the old six-masted schooner.
Yeah. And then it has a seal on it, and there you can see the seal a little bit. And it's kind of a combination of letters and numbers, and I don't know what that is across the top. I mean, but that seal is on both of the straps. And I was just absolutely thrilled to get that float, and I think I paid $45. That was just unbelievable. But I bought it in a group of floats. And he didn't, I called him immediately and said, call them in England, have them go through all the floats, see if there are any more with the straps. He did, and there weren't. Now this float may be one of my rarest floats. Let me go to the next picture maybe. S.H. Davis, Gillnet float, patented January 16, 1877. That float has a groove in it. I believe this is an American float. And I know of one other one, and it's about that long. And that's a really exciting float. Really exciting float.
Where did you find that one?
A collector friend of mine went to a big bottle show, and he found it at a bottle show, and picked it up for me and sold it to me, passed it on to me. And it was just one of those lucky
See,
things.
Roy, we're gonna get a lot of friends.
Oh, there is no net on this. This has a groove, and I took a piece of braided leader, coated it with plastic, and ran it through, and a little lead cinches, and I cinched it on and hung it with that. And those worked really well. As a matter of fact, that's how I hung back here a little bit. Well, here, you can see it there. That's, you see this is that's like a fishing leader. You know, so that's a 200-pound test. And I just wove it around and used the lead cinches, or whatever they call this, the squeeze, and made a net for it. And I did the same thing for that one. Now, during World War II, prior to World War II, a lot of the floats came from Japan to the United States, and for fishermen. And a lot of the East Coast fishermen used the European floats. During World War II, especially for the shark fishing, the Japanese floats were no longer available, of course. And they started making floats in the United States, at least did a lot more. And Northwestern Glass in Washington made a lot of floats. And what's going on? That's the same float. Well, I'm going the wrong way, I'm sorry, anyway, but I apologize. Okay, there's the Davis float. Okay, and most of the Northwestern Glass floats that were made for shark fishing were round floats with a flat bottom and a little nipple on them. Some of them had nets, some of them were sewn into a canvas bag, and I've got one in a canvas bag down in the case. And for a while, they experimented with the idea of making what they call a donut float. And they made 3 or 4 clear and 1 brown one. And it was an experimental float that was never fished, and that's the only brown one in existence. And I'm fortunate enough to have that in my collection. And that's the end of my slides, I believe. Yes. most of this.
Wonder why they didn't use them.
They were too difficult to make. Turned out that they just were not efficient to manufacture, and they didn't offer enough of an advantage over the round floats, and they just continued with what they were making before.
As the fishermen would bring in their nets, would the floats bang into each other and break, or how fragile are they?
Well, surprisingly, the nets were very efficient. The net not only held the float, but it also protected the float. It was a bumper. And if the floats would bang into the deck or a piece of machinery or into each other, the nets would heavily cushion it. And I'm sure they broke floats. But they could take a pretty hefty knock, especially those early heft nets were really padding them. But the nets protected the floats a lot.
How did they make those nets? How long did it take them to create those beautiful nets around the floats?
Well, in Japan, they hand tied them, and I believe that they're hand tied. They're hand woven. So they spend, it's labor intensive. Even now in Japan, you can go there and see the fishermen not only hand tying the nets, but sitting there with a little hammer, knocking the barnacles off the floats. And they have to do that every couple of years, especially in the Sea of Japan. The barnacles just, man, you practically have to run to stay away from them. They go so fast.
What is this, blue one that's back here?
Okay, that's a great
Oh,
one.
it's green, it looks blue sitting down there.
That's a great one to show because it's got the double F on it. Can you see the backwards F's on it? This is the Hokkyo glass from Hokkaido, Japan, and it's the absolutely standard 1 of a million float. That's exactly what the relatively pretty high quality float. It's really round, it doesn't have a lot of bubbles. It's a very nice float. Sometimes they sealed them with their insignia, sometimes they didn't. And they made these by the millions. And they're pretty, but they're all the same.
So the more markings you can get on it, the more unique it is.
Yeah, you're collecting, you're looking for beauty and rarity and uniqueness.
I have one, I have no idea what's in it.
Uh-huh.
My father would walk the beach from 39 to 50 in Ocean Lake. May come from there, but
Today? $25. Good question. How do the floats get water in them? Well, if it's got a crack and it's got water in it, water means nothing to me. But there are a lot of stories, but I think it's really very simple. The button is a mechanical plug of the hole, and it isn't perfect all the time. And you get little microscopic passageways that allow water to come through. And especially if the float is held underwater, which happens oftentimes with fishing gear, it gets full of fish and whatever, it's held underwater while it's under pressure. Water will seep in, then it comes back up and the pressure is gone and it stays. I'm sure exactly that's what happened because there's no crack on this float. And so it seeps around the button from leaking when it's being fished, and probably most of the seeping takes place when the float is held underwater. But you hear these stories about them held underwater 1,000 meters or 100 meters or something. It never happens. You can't get a float down that far. But you don't have to hold it down very far for it to leak, especially if if it's in the fishing gear. It may spend, in its lifetime a long time underwater and just floating out in the current. The barnacles grow on it. Usually the way they float is heavy side down. So the button's underwater, and it's floating out there for years. And there's a lot of opportunity for water to seep through.
what do they use a really tiny ones? I found one about that big.
The smallest one I ever found was about the size of a quarter. It's actually my saddest story. I wasn't planning on telling you guys that. But it came up, and I was showing the float to my friend. It was brown, which is an unusual color. I mean, not nearly as common as the various shades of green, amber, and like that. And anyway, it was a quarter size and had a little bitty barnacle on it, and I saved the pieces. But anyway, I was reaching for it, and I dropped it, and it hit the shelf, and I reached down to catch it, and I missed it, and it fell on the floor and broke. And that was a very sad day. Still.
What did you say when it hit the floor?
Oh, darn. It's gonna be hard to find another one of those.
Would you tell us about the float that the couple from Calgary found in Bandon this past week?
You bet. May I have it, please, for a moment?
Oh.
Nice float. It's Chinese. You can see the swirl marks where it was rolled in a mold. It's got the ref button. It's very typical of the Chinese floats, and probably in the 40s, and it's almost cobalt. It's a nice float. It's a very nice float. Excellent color. It's pretty well made. Pretty well made. It's quite a quite well made float.
And would that
Not
be
many
more
bubbles.
expensive than a green? because
Oh
of the
yes.
color?
Oh yeah. This is a real nice float. It's a great collectible float. It's not as collectible as some of those really unusual shaped ones. I mean, I showed you 30 years of collecting here. I mean, I've got floats I didn't show you, but this is a very nice float. Excellent float. Yes.
Did you tell them about the little phonetic booklet that you took to Japan with you that your friend?
Oh no, I didn't do that. I will. Anyway, this is
Where did you find, where was that?
by Bandon. These folks down there. They're on vacation from Canada. On the beach. Yeah, beach bums.
Oh, boy, that was
Very, very nice. Yeah. No, well, maybe. There's a theory that there are 1 million floats out there still floating around, and I don't believe it. I don't think so. If the wind blows a certain percentage of floats to shore every year, you can kind of extrapolate from what you find what's out there, and I think that with the advent of the nylon rope and the care with which they're taking care of their floats, that there aren't a million rare floats out there. But certainly there are some, and that's one of them, and that's been out there a long, long time.
Did we ever find any in the Arctic ice?
Well, you hear stories about that. I guess it's theoretically possible, but I sure wouldn't want to spend much time beachcombing that source.
Wanted to tell
Excuse me
you,
one second. You're next.
a fisherman friend of ours in Newport, I'd say it was around in the 60s, fishing out of Newport, quite a ways offshore, I don't recall how far. But he ran into a kelp bed that was loaded with glass boats. And he dip net the bigger ones and some of the unusual rolling pins. He's got one I got like the
Yeah, that's a jumbo roller.
and filled the deck, and there were still many left in
Yeah.
this kelp.
There are masses of debris that clump together out in the ocean, and there are areas out there where there are floats for sure. There are a lot of floats out there, don't misunderstand me, but I don't think that, there are anywhere near the amount of floats there were when we were finding thousands washing up on a weekend. I mean, we had, what was that? There was a day in '64, was it, when or a weekend where over 100,000 floats washed up in Oregon. I mean, I've got a picture of pickup trucks coming off the beach in a row. This morning I went down to Tillamook today. They had a one-day tire dump thing where you could get rid of tires. And I took a pickup load of old tires down, and they were all lined up. Well, it was like that. I mean, they were all lined up, going out on the beach, except they were all full of floats. In those days, we're never going to see those days again. That stuff isn't out there waiting for the right direction of wind. It's just not there anymore.
This winter, we had a float wash up in front of my house. I lived down in LCB in Walport.
Uh-huh.
And it was a fairly good sized amber float. Some people found it. And so I was just out there walking my dog.
Uh-huh.
I missed it. But anyway, float had plastic coated wire on it. There were no barnacles. What would be the story with something like that?
I'd love to see it, because I haven't seen one with a plastic coated wire. But I
Actually,
mean,
there were
that's
a few, and that weekend there was a couple found in Seal Rock. And
with the same kind of netting on it?
from the picture, it looked like it.
Yeah.
It was a modern, the plastic coated wire you could buy at Hardware
Sure.
Black.
Well, that's what I used to, I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, what's the strongest thing I can hold this
Right.
float with, and
I thought maybe something that's been used recently.
oh yeah, that would be used recently.
Yeah.
And boy, they're still fishing with these floats.
Okay.
And,
But they're old floats that they're using,
right.
they're not manufacturing anything?
No, they're still using the old ones. It's too expensive to make new ones.
So when these are gone, what do you
They're being careful. And,
think?
and they got a lot of them. I
Oh,
mean,
no.
I've never been there when all those wind rows of floats are gone. And then, you can go to fishermen's backyards, and see a pile of floats half the size of this room. I mean, it's just not uncommon. The problem is they're all common floats. I mean, it's fine for them,
Right,
because that's what they fish with. They don't care. I mean,
yeah.
matter of fact, one of the really discouraging things is to find a beautiful float that's on one of their nets, because they don't want to take the trouble of cutting it off and giving it to you and tying another one on. You don't want to sell things. They won't sell anything to you. Matter of fact, this goes to the story you're asking me on this. I don't really speak Japanese. I can say hello, or a cup of coffee. But what I did is I got pictures of floats, and I had one of my friends who writes Japanese write little notes, and, where I'm from and what I'm looking for, and you have floats like these, and I show them the little book, and they get all excited and run into their sheds, and it was really great fun.
The American.
No, they don't want money. I've offered them money. Sometimes you can give them a bottle of whiskey or something, but usually they just seem to love to. They're very wonderful people. Yeah, they call me and they laugh. And then, they call their friends over and point at you, and they all laugh. They talk some more, and they all laugh. And then the guy disappears. You don't leave when he disappears. You wait, because he comes back in the box. If he says, like that, then you leave. But unless he tells you to leave, you wait, because they'll come back, and boy, they come back.
Do you collect photographs and postcards also, Jim? of
Thank you
floats?
for bringing that up. Yeah, I collect postcards of glass fishing floats. So if you folks come across any old fishing float postcards, I've got a little handout here of kind of floats. We talked about that already, but also postcards. And so that's what my collection's about. And I brought a few photographs if you guys want to come up afterwards and look through it. Here's another really wonderful float. It was found in 1947 at Straub Park by Pacific City. 18 inches, it's clear with a cobalt button. This shows just pretty much the same floats, but not one at a time. This is an interesting story. This is a basketball-sized misshapen float. It's actually a little more lavender than this picture shows. And in 1972, I was walking on the beach in Kailua, Hawaii, and it was real dark out, and this float rolled up at my feet. And I picked it up, and I knew it was kind of nice because it was irregularly shaped and it was heavy. And when I got home and got it in the light and saw it was lavender, and something snapped. And I've never been the same since. And that's when that was when I, believe it or not, that's when I kind of quit beachcombing. I still beachcombed after that, but that's when I started looking for floats. Because I realized that there was a lot more there than what I was seeing before. And that's when I started actually, looking in antique stores and talking with other collectors and people type beachcombers.
You mentioned in the beginning these stories you hear about the Aleutian Islands or up these remote islands, the beaches littered with floats up in Alaska.
Oh, it's true.
These are just not accessible, or nobody just had the
They're not
thought to go up there?
they're not easily accessible. I've got the phone number of an Alaskan guy right now that will sell me 10,000 at 20 cents a piece.
Okay. So this is true. They are up there. You
They're
think
baseball-sized common
mixed in
floats.
there. You think mixed in there? There's one or two.
I've spent a lot of time talking with fishermen and just guys to help me look in Alaska. not much has come out of Alaska. I don't know what it is about the
The
current,
currents
the way
separate the
they
big ones
fish.
from the small ones, or?
I don't know what it is, but there don't seem to be many collectible floats come out of Alaska. Now, I know that the man who found the string of jungle rolling pins, that happened in Alaska. And I know for sure, a friend of mine found one of those really dark burgundy purple TOs, baseball size in Alaska. But, gosh, I'm sitting here thinking of 3 or 4 stories. There are 1,000 stories in Oregon. I mean, I don't know how many millions of floats were found here, but I mean, millions of floats were found in Oregon.
Maybe all your sea otters are using them to break a abalone shell.
A lot of them do break.
You know,
A lot of them do break.
it could be the very rocky terrain and the very, very rough oceans that maybe the big ones break on the rocks up
A lot of them do. If they hit the rocks, they're gonna break, that's for sure. Or, not always though. I've got one float. Let me see if I can find a picture of it. Here it is right here. It's, you guys can come up later. This is actually a European float, but it is absolutely covered with chips and no cracks. It's lavender and it rolled on a rocky beach and didn't break.
And didn't break.
It's quite a fun float. The one above it was documented, found in 1917. That was a really great one.
Jim, how do you transport your floats when you fly back from Hawaii or Japan or?
Well, in the old days, they used to put tags on the nets, not wrap them at all, and just mail them. But I've never had that much nerve. What I do if I have a good float is I put it in a box with packing, and then I put that box in another box with packing around that, and I've never had a float break that way, ever. And you just take it down to the post office, and you can mail a big float for under $20, including insurance. And that's how I bring it back from Japan, too.
Jim, were glass floats ever used on the Great Lakes?
I was just in Ohio last weekend asking that question, and along Lake Erie, and nobody seems to be able to confirm that they were, but I can't imagine why they wouldn't be. But I went to a few antiques, I went to a bottle show, and the antique stores that I visited and the people I talked to, nobody, I haven't got anybody to say, yes, I know for sure they were, but it certainly is logical, isn't it? I mean, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't
Would
they?
the glass float manufacturers be in the Great Lakes region, or would they have imported them from Japan or other places?
There were definitely glass floats made along the East Coast, and a lot of them were used for lobster pots. And I've got some really nice old New England glass floats. And I think that S.H. Davis float is an American float. And I'm sure there are others. But I know lots of floats were shipped over from Europe, and I'm sure they were very cheap. I went through an old fisherman's shed in Newfoundland and found a brand new, never unpacked box of German floats from pre-war, pre-World War II.
Is there an opportunity for the public to see your collection?
Not really at this point. What I'm doing is I'm gradually starting to put my collection into the museum, and I'm going to rotate it. And if you guys are interested, I would be willing to take more photographs and do another talk. And at some point, it's all going to be available to see. But I'm not at the point I want to open my home up to the public.
How many floats do you have?
Well, that's a good question. I've got way over 1,000, but I've probably got 200 really collectible floats. Really collectible floats.
Where will the museum be?
Well,
This
Right here?
here.
it's simply starting here.
I just wanted to tell you, Jim, that it has been a long time since a display, a donation, a loan to the museum has generated as much enthusiasm as your float collection downstairs. That is an incredibly interesting thing for the visitors to the museum to see. And I know that it's a work in progress, but so many of them have questions about the different kinds of floats.
Sure.
So I hope that we'll have some written material on so that we can explain that more fully to them. It's a lovely collection, and we certainly are grateful for that.
Well, thank you very much. And it's- It's an evolving thing, and I look forward to expanding and improving it over time.
And you're a pretty darn good storyteller.
Yes,
Well, thank you. Yes,
When you're beachcombing, what do you look for, how do you find these things?
good question.
They just
Actually,
roll right up to you?
Amos Wood's book is very good on explaining how to beachcomb. The biggest problem is it takes a lot of luck, But you know, I walk the beach a lot. I walk the beach almost every day. And the beach is wonderful whether you find a float or not. And I find beautiful shells and interesting pieces of driftwood and just the exercise and the fresh air. But the best time to beachcomb is the worst time to walk, which is right after high tide.
At the storm.
And I like to walk the beach at low tide.
Do they usually come up with the Valhalla? I've heard that the ones I found, I've always found them as the
Yeah,
Valhalla.
or right after. I mean, the good strong west winds, the longer it blows, the better your chances. So if you get 3 or 4 days of good stiff winds, boy, that's the time. It really increases your odds a lot.
Do they come up at other times when Valhalla is not there?
Yeah, they can. They can come up at any time, but you know they're out there floating around in the current, and if the current brings them to the shore, that's where they're going to go. But when the wind is blowing, they're sticking up and they act like a little bit like a sail, and they'll cut across the current a little bit and get out into the area where they come to shore.
Do they have to have ropes on them or just without the ropes?
Some of them have ropes, some don't. You know, if they're going to stay out there long enough, the ropes are going to rot off. The nylon, of course, lasts much, much longer. Most of the old floats were found without ropes. A lot of the new floats, some of the new floats are found with, some aren't. I mean, I can't, it's hard to generalize on that, really. And most of the floats that you find now, some are Korean and a lot are Chinese. You find very few Japanese. And you still find plastic, but not as much as you used to. Yes?
I was gonna say, it seems like a lot of luck, because I was walking 9 Beach this January and found a 14-inch one. And I was like, people were coming off the beach, and I was going on the beach, and it must have just dropped right in front of me, And it was flat bottom, so I think it just dropped and didn't roll back out, It's like, people had walked right by that same space, 5 minutes before me. So it wasn't like,
Yeah, when people are on the beach all the time, boy, it really cuts your odds down. I mean, it's like me walking along at night, in the dark, rolled up with my feet, so
Yeah,
I
but
guess
it's bright, sunny
fate was
morning.
telling me to change. You folks have been very patient. Are there any other questions at all? You're welcome to come up and take a look at the pictures. I highly recommend Amos Wood's book. There's a little article about the very first fishing floats up here that you can take. If you want to look at the article with the man who found this black float, it's up here. And I have the handout if you want it on the kinds of floats that I'm looking for the collection. Thank you.
Thank you.